obviously been a long time, what with the pandemic and stuff, and I've been over in the US playing quite a few times now, and I was meant to be over in April of 2020, and then we all know what happened there.
Yeah.
So to get back to the US, I was in New Jersey, New York, and then on to California as well. It was an amazing trip. So good to be back.
New Jersey, New York, and then California. Man, all around the globe. Wow.
Yeah, it was a cool one to tell my friends about back home and say, oh look, I'm not going to be on the grid for a little while. I'm off to the US, and they're like, oh, where you going? You going back to New York? And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to New York, but I'm also going to New Jersey and California. And they're like, whoa, that's mad. Like, it's just so nice to have the world back open in the way that we kind of knew it, and like have the opportunities to travel and share music and see friends and stuff again. And I don't think we can ever underestimate the power and the importance of that ever again after this pandemic,
Oh, for sure, yeah. Yeah, it was a little trippy for me. I'd been hopping around episodes in your podcast, just picking up stories and stuff, just hopping around there. And then I thought to myself just yesterday, I thought, oh, I better hop to the end here. I hadn't listened to the most recent episode yet. I thought, oh, let's see where he left off last. And you and I had been messaging about how you were coming to New York, and in that episode you're talking about how you were planning to go out to New York. I thought, oh, here we go. Everything's syncing up now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've not actually released an episode since September 2021, and the reason for that is basically because it was almost like a lockdown hobby for us. It was something that we started doing. So like my friend Ali, who does the podcast with me, he's been the sound man in my projects for like the last 12 years. We went to school together and stuff, and then we found ourselves in such an unusual position where he had nothing going on, I had nothing going on, and it was like, right, well, let's do something different. And I have to confess, I'm not a massive listener of podcasts. I've not really got into the trend of listening to them and stuff, but I said to Ali, look, I said maybe we should start one. And he was like, nah. And I said, well, look, we're doing nothing else. It's something that we can do from home. It's an opportunity for us to share our stories and whatnot. And that's basically what we did. And then obviously we had the opportunity to get guests on as well, which was just great. Some of them had really, really interesting life stories to tell. And then obviously as the world reopened in September 21, we found ourselves, we've done 52 episodes, one every week, and now we're back in a situation where we're flying from A to B, to both together and separately in different projects, and it's like, it's hard to sustain that.
Sure.
And so we've focused now, most recently, on doing some live events with like a live panel, and we had the most recent one of those last weekend in our hometown in Dundee, in Scotland. We've done two others. We did one in Edinburgh, we did one in New York, and it's amazing how that's grown as well, because something that we were recording literally in our homes, in our houses while locked up, has become something where
sometimes laying on your couch, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just real casual.
Yeah, laying on the couch, just chatting nonsense, and then suddenly you're out there with a live audience and a live panel up on stage with you, and actually some pretty prestigious guests up there. And I think it's really, really, it highlighted to me the difference between we can sit lying on the couch having a conversation, but that can be edited. Whereas when you're sat on a stage or stood on a stage with a live panel of prestigious guests, is like, you can't edit that. You've got to get it right.
That's learning your sheet music beforehand versus someone looks at you and says, all right, now improvise a solo over the next 8 bars, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, how did this podcast start? What was your story behind this one? How did that come about?
It also started during the pandemic. That's
right.
Close friend of mine had talked about, with myself and another bagpiping friend. The three of us had been playing pipes together for a few years. He'd been talking about wanting to do a bagpiping themed podcast, and he was always all about. It's a funny thing that here where I live in Utah, we felt like when we were kids learning pipes, there was this weird kind of tribalism between pipe bands. kind of this like we don't talk to each other. You know, if you go play with another band, you're a traitor kind of stuff. You know, it always felt a little weird. And he was always all about like, well, we should have friends everywhere. You know, we should all be one big happy family. You know, compete in the circle, but then be friends otherwise. You know. And so
that's a really important point to mention, you know. I say sometimes, I played in pipe bands in Scotland as well, and sometimes the political climate of it all does mask the fun and enthusiasm and excitement and friendships that, you know, that actually should exist because of this special kind of club, this sort of exclusive club of like pipers and drummers and stuff from around the world. We really should be trying to promote the instrument and the cultures as one, you know, rather than batting heads against each other.
Yeah, and that was the sad thing that he felt like he'd been seeing was that like a lot of friends, if for whatever reason, like even if their practice night didn't line up so they couldn't go to rehearsal or something, like rather than being able to go play with another band that would fit their sort of the chapter of life they were in, they just had to stop playing at all because of the weird politics, you know, the tribalism there. And so he was always like, oh, wouldn't a podcast be cool where we could all get to know each other and stuff like that? And so he actually passed away just like a few, maybe not even a year before the pandemic kind of got crazy. And so then sitting in the middle of the pandemic as well, you know, just kind of thinking like, well, shoot, let's do this, you know, for memory of him, you know, kind of, and then also like, because we can't see each other at the band hall, let's have conversations. You know, that's kind of how it got started.
Oh man, what a shame! But good on you for, you know, running with this and doing it. What is the Celtic music scene like in Utah?
Well, maybe I'm not the very best to say, you know, there might be stuff happening that I don't even know about, but we do have, we've got a decent number of competitive pipe bands, you know, and probably 3 or 4 Highland games where there's going to be a competition every year, and then maybe 1 or 2 others that, you know, are just for the bands to get together. And then there are, you know, there's a chapter of uilleann pipe enthusiasts, and, you know, there are sessions that are happening. I'd bet you've got 2 or 3 options every week across the state for a session on the weekend, you know.
Wow, so yeah, it's certainly active enough, you know.
Yeah, there's nothing,
cool.
That's for sure, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. I'll need to get myself across at some point.
Man, you let me know if you ever have a reason to stop between New York and California. I'd love to love to meet you sometime and find some places to come play, yeah.
Yeah, man, it'd be awesome.
Well, listen, I was thinking maybe. Oh, actually, that was the reason I was going to ask you about what else to do with the all ears, you know, with Weir's World. You had mentioned doing a drive across America at some point, and that might be the opportunity to stop by in Utah if you can someday convince Allie to come and do the drive across America idea and hit some podcast episodes in every state or something. Huh?
Yeah, that'd be awesome, man. That'd be so cool. It would be pretty time-consuming, and it'd be a difficult thing to put together. But man, it'd be awesome. Sometime
when you can take a year off from everything else you're doing, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe 2056.
There we go. There we go.
You heard it here first.
Yeah, 2056. We'll be looking forward to it. Well, hey man, I was thinking that maybe we could open up. So usually I come fading in on these episodes with just some drones, but I thought with this episode maybe we could come fading in on one of my very favorite, like, not that anybody's like forcing me to pick a favorite, of course, nor that your tunes need my endorsement, right? But if I had to pick a favorite track, Transformation Blues is probably my very favorite that I've heard from you at all. So how about we open with Transformation Blues?
Yeah, spot on.
I love that one. So, and you know, I would love to hear kind of like sort of like a biography run through, if you don't mind. Like, kind of tell me a little bit about where you grew up and how you grew up, and throughout that, sprinkle in at what point did you pick up the pipes, and also I want to know what were you listening to that led to this sort of bagpipey, punky, ska kind of sound that I feel like comes through real strong with Transformation Blues.
Thanks, man. Well, so first of all, I grew up around Carnoustie and Dundee in Scotland, northeast Scotland. I was an incredibly shy young boy growing up, I quickly lost that when I picked up the pipes.
I was gonna say, but you didn't play the flute or something. Huh? You went straight to the bagpipe.
I was a painfully shy child actually, and but my mum's uncle, Jack Stewart, was a quite well-renowned piper in the local scene, and I guess around Scotland. He sadly passed a couple of years ago as well. We were around there one sort of Christmas, if I'm not mistaken. It was like 2001, and he had said, why don't you give the pipes a go? Why don't you give them a try? And I was like, yeah. Hey, there's not a musical bone in my body. I don't fancy it. It's not for me.
So he didn't have like a reason to be saying that. He wasn't like, oh, this kid loves music. He just pulled that out of the air, huh?
Nah, yeah, exactly, yeah. And it's like, nah. My parents are not pushy parents. That's really important to note. But they were like, why don't you have a go? And I was like, well, okay. And I went along, and I fell in love with it. Absolutely, like completely and entirely. And I heard an amazing quote from Rab Matheson a few years ago, and he was talking about how once you're hooked, it's like a disease that you can't shake. You can't get rid of it. And but the most positive of diseases, one that and I think I'm talking there about my my shyness as a child. Like that single moment, I guess you can trace back to then leading to all sorts of friendships being formed, all sorts of different, I don't know, just things making connections being made, and I guess everything stems from that. So 2002 I had started playing, and then it slowly led to me picking up other instruments. I now play guitar. I can sing a bit. I've certainly improved in that over the years. I picked up the whistle during the pandemic. I can try tune on lots of other bits. Ukulele, banjo, bass. I'm not horrendous on. It's all kind of stemmed from there. The Gleadhraich thing, that stemmed from high school. Well, my brother's our drummer, so obviously by default I have to know him. and then I'd sort of become friendly with Ross. He was the year above me at school, and it was sort of like we were doing some sort of charity stuff and that for different things at the school, and it was like, right, well, let's try and put something together, inspired by the classic. Like, I loved Gordon Duncan, I still do. I wished I could have met him. I was inspired by. Sorry.
I do. I want to drop in there that I do feel like I could hear that when I first started listening to your piping. I felt like, and you do play some Gordon Duncan, or maybe just is it some Ross Ainsley stuff that I've heard you play?
Yeah.
And of course that trickles through too. Ross being connected to Gordon too. But I do 100%. Feel like I feel like I could hear it. This guy loved Gordon Duncan, surely.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think I would say 90% of people coming on your podcast will say, "Oh, Gordon Duncan."
Who doesn't, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, 100%. And so I found myself listening to those kind of pipe-related things. There was also the Red Hot Chili Peppers thing that was taken off, and I also. Growing up, I haven't always listened to bagpipe music. I'm kind of most if I'm putting on some music in the car or putting on some vinyls in the house, I listen to a lot of rock music, indie rock music. I was massively inspired by bands like the Libertines, Oasis. I do love some ska as well, and so over time, all of those influences have kind of begun to seep through the music of Gleadhraich, and it's no longer just a case of like writing a bagpipe piece of music. It's a case of writing something that is going to work on a major scale, like actually with like a big lineup of musicians behind it.
Yeah how not to hop around too much, I'll pull you back in there, but how does that work for you? I mean, are you playing on a B flat chanter? Like, how do you because when you're composing, I know that you've got horns in there too in a lot of your arranging, and if you got a B flat instrument that might make it easier. But if you're if you're working with something. Well, just tell me a little bit about that. How do you bring music together yourself?
Yeah, so you're right. It's a B flat chanter that I'm playing. The G1 B flat chanter. I guess mostly I am the starting point. I will write I'll either compose something or think, that song could be arranged for the pipes in this way, and then normally from there it sort of germinates onto Ross, and I'll say, look, Ross, what do you think of this? Do you think this is a goer? Ross is he's not just one of my best friends, he's one of the most honest people that I know. If he says, oh, Craig, that's a lot of shit, we definitely can't work with that. He'll be straight up honest with me.
He's a good filter to pass this through then, huh?
Absolutely. So once it gets through the Ross White filter, then we're on to the other guys, and we get ourselves together in the room, and we see if we can sort of beef it up, and how we can make each different piece of music unique, because ultimately there are lots of bagpipe acts out there, and which is great. There's a growing number of bagpipe related acts, but you want something that stands out from the crowd and it's quite unique as well, and I guess that's what we hope to achieve mostly with the stuff with Gleadhraich.
Yeah, and that to be clear, so Ross was a friend in high school. He's the one who's playing guitar, and we hear a lot of vocals from him on your albums, right?
Yeah, so Ross was a friend from school, and he plays guitar and some vocals as well on the records too. Yeah.
Now Ross must be comfortable with the bagpipes at this point, right? I remember hearing at some point that your bass player didn't like pipes. Does he still not, or is that?
No, he hates them. He hates them. Like,
it's around. Huh?
it's at the point where we have separate dressing rooms just so that he doesn't have to listen to the tuning of the pipes. But I say he hates them. We use that as a bit of a fun joke to a point. He doesn't. He wouldn't. So he wouldn't choose to listen to them, I would say, is more of a fair reflection.
Yeah.
But obviously he loves being a part of the band, and we love having him. And so we make it work. We meet in the middle. We compromise for Graham.
Yeah. It's fun. It's great though that so much great music infused with bagpipes can come from a group where even one of the members isn't super enthusiastic about bagpipes on their own.
Yeah, and I think the thing is with the pipes is that they are in a way a bit of a Marmite instrument, aren't they? Because they're not exactly a quiet instrument for starters. And I think the thing is as well is you can have a bad guitar player and it's like, oh yeah, whatever. If you hear the pipes played badly, it's like, oh man,
it's really bad.
It's and so. So yeah, I think that's possibly where some of the Marmite stuff stems from, and I think if we can bridge that gap in some way to reach out to people who, like Graham, would not choose to listen to the pipes, but actually make them go, oh, actually that sounded pretty cool up there, that. Then that's a win for us,
Yeah. Well, and speaking of, I wondered if that is that part of. I mean, you mentioned the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Honestly, the stuff I get most excited about listening to on your albums are your originals. But you have got some excellent, really well done, very classy covers. Maybe one we could pull in here is that maybe we could pull in a sample of "Take on Me." I really like that tune anyway, so it's exciting to hear that one. Outside of Dundee, maybe that aren't as enthusiastically already aware of you. do you ever like open with some covers to kind of get them on your side first? You know, is there strategy there, or are the covers just for fun?
No, there's definitely strategy. There's undoubtedly strategy. We, over the years, when we've been structuring a set list, we kind of put it into 3 different categories and then sprinkle them through the set. So one is obviously the covers that have been arranged for the pipes. Mm-hmm. One is original bagpipe-led material that I've written, and the other is stuff that is vocal-led. Mm-hmm. And so we sprinkle that through the set for a couple of different reasons. One, so that if there are people like poor Graham who would not necessarily listen to the pipes, that the set is broken up so that, you know, there is a vocal element to it through the set that does break up the bagpipe led stuff.
Give them some relief, huh?
Yeah, exactly. And then also, yeah, like it's not everyone that would listen to a set of just original bagpipe led compositions, and so everything is strategically placed in our set list. Over the years, we have opened with different stuff. At the minute, it's usually Transformation Blues or I'm a Believer, because if you're not captured by the horn section at the start of Transformation Blues, then you ought to not be at our show in the first place. and then I'm a Believer is obviously so instant as well and well recognisable. Yeah. In terms of a closing segment of the show, it's at the moment, and for a little while now actually, it's been the big 1, 2, 3 of Take On Me, Rock Me Mama, and Livin' La Vida Loca. At the minute we're closing with Livin' La Vida Loca, but we've also closed our set with Take On Me. Those are kind of interchangeable. So to answer your question, yes, absolutely, there is a very clear sort of strategic approach to how we prepare a set list for our shows.
Yeah. And when you're doing the covers, is that also following a similar, like when you're developing a cover, I mean, does it follow a similar path where you yourself specifically have thought, this could fit on pipes, and then you pass it over to Ross, and then you kind of beef it up?
Well, I would say that's how we used to do it. In the early days of the band, it was like it all sort of came from me in that sense. But we have a much more much more democratic process, I suppose, to the approach of the covers these days, whereby, you know, it could be that someone when we're out, or someone in the group chat, or someone somewhere says, how about this? Why don't we try this? And then obviously from there, it's like down to me to see if we can manipulate it onto the pipes. It's sort of 50-50. Half of them sort of work in that scale, and half of them come really close but don't quite make it. Yeah. And it's quite frustrating sometimes in that sense. But Take On Me, for example, was one of Ross's. That came from Ross, because I think there's a ska version, and maybe I've been too honest here. There's a ska version of Take On Me that was done by Real Big Fish. Yeah. And Ross loved that and was like, look, we could technically sort of steal that, but like have it led by the pipes. Yeah. And it was like, shit, yeah, we could, absolutely we could, and that is pretty much what we've done. So thanks to Real Big Fish for that.
You did it well, so it's fine. However it comes about, because it's done well, that's what matters.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, no, I know that version, and I like that more than the original. Honestly, that's what I usually listen to, so I definitely can feel it. But that didn't, for me, as already a fan of Real Big Fish and a lover of ska, I definitely didn't hear that and go, "Hey, wait, they just stole this." You know, on the contrary, I thought, "Now this is delightful. I love this." You know,
brilliant.
I think you're safe. That democratic process you mentioned, I remember you mentioning, it must have been on your podcast, that maybe it was back in your high school days, that initially you had like maybe a very strong sort of like idea of like regimental style piping, and it needed, you know, kind of that rigid, it must be this way, here's how we're going to do it. Do you feel like that had to break down over time for you to maintain the longevity that's got you to this point? You know, did it have to become democratic to survive?
Yeah, if I'm being totally honest, I think that was me. Like, I think that I was obviously playing in pipe bands at that time that had obviously a regimental element to it. I was quite, how might I say, I reckon I was quite as much as I didn't think it was at the time, now upon reflection, I was quite closed-minded with my approach to music, and was like, and also because I was at that time the main driver behind the band. I was like, right, we got to rehearse at this time, we've got to be here at this time, we've got to do this, it's got to look like X, Y, and Z, and that, upon reflection, is really a closed-minded way of approaching music and I suppose life in general. And as I've grown as a human, and as I've grown as a musician, that has, as you say, that's faded, and that's we've sort of eaten away at that, and actually it's almost like anything goes now. So yeah, absolutely, that had to fade, that had to go, and actually it's quite nice to look back and see how much you have grown, both as a human and as a musician as well, over that period of time,
Yeah, absolutely.
And also the pandemic gave us such a rich opportunity to do that, actually, to stop and reflect and to take stock of where we've been in our lives and where we're going and what we want to do and who we are, and
Yeah, how did the timing of Rewritten work? Were you guys recording that during the pandemic, or had you done I feel like that released like during the months of the pandemic, but also there is this weird time warp with the pandemic too. So maybe I'm, my brain, it's like, was that 100 years ago or 2 years ago or what?
No, that came out in 2019.
Okay.
So it was just a bit before the pandemic. The timing of the pandemic was atrocious. I mean, it wasn't great for anyone, but it was atrocious for us in the sense that we released that in 2019, and then the intention was to go full pelt in 2020 with our 10th anniversary year celebrations.
Yeah.
We had a few things lined up, and we had a massive Dundee homecoming show, which was all set and had been planned for like 18 months and whatnot, and then boom, like literally the week of that show, that big homecoming show, everything shut down, and it was like we were one of the first events in our area to be canned, and we eventually did the show in March this year. And we started off the show with a massive sort of montage, looking back over the last 2 years, but the whole show kicked off with the phone call, or like a sort of acted out version of the phone call saying, look, we're going to have to cancel this, like this isn't cool, let's aim for October, let's do this in October. And it was like, no one could have predicted that the world would shut down for as long as it did, and fortunately we obviously got to play that big homecoming show in Dundee in March, which was always going to be an emotional show, but the emotions were hugely heightened by the fact that of what had all gone before,
Yeah. That, and it makes me think of that track Where I'm From, from the album Where We're From. By the way, does that album name Where We're From, was that at all be picked because of the homophone Weir, like your last name, Weir, where we're from, Weir, you and your brothers?
Do you know, I'd love to say yeah, it was, but no one's ever mentioned that before. But yeah, it's a good shout. That it wasn't named after that.
Lucky happenstance, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I guess it was kind of like Where I'm From is such a centre point of that record, and it was like, where I'm from doesn't reflect the fact that we're a band, so where we're from felt like it fitted a bit better. That's all.
That's all. Well, just I love. I'm kind of imagining that the feelings around that big homecoming show that you just did. Just I feel like throughout your work there is sort of like a strong thread of like travel in a way. Like kind of discovering, going out, but also like talking about where I'm from, where we're from, kind of like this sort of like love of home throughout as well. In fact, I didn't know I only 2-3 days ago listened to the podcast episode where you talked about the story behind your tune Highland Road. I had been imagining that Highland Road must have been a road through the Highlands, not a place in Canada, but that track where I'm from, maybe I'll play some of that. But I'll never forget where I'm from.
where I'm from. No, I'll never forget where I'm from.
Maybe tell me, am I reaching too much for this idea that there's like sort of travel and home and stuff like that throughout your music?
No, it's a really interesting point that you raised there. I think that, so first of all, where we're from was a key piece in our homecoming show as well. In fact, we were backed for that track by a 50-piece choir, which was incredible. I have to say, like when I was when I was initially sent the arrangement from the choir, like I cried because it was so powerful. Like, it's unbelievable. To go back to your question, yes, absolutely. I think travel inspires me a lot. I'm very fortunate that I get to travel a lot, but equally it inspires me to write a lot. That's not to say that I didn't write during the pandemic, because I did. I mean, there was not much else going on. But yes, so you've got where I'm from, which actually coincidentally is another of Ross's pieces, through to Highland Road and everything in between. There's California Calling. There is
Lost in Guangzhou.
Lost in Guangzhou. There's travel inspires me, and there's also other references through other songs and other pieces of music from other trips and whatnot. I mean, the Highland Road is a piece that I'm especially proud of, because I guess when people listen to it, as you've just expressed, they don't ever imagine that the Highland Road is in Canada.
No.
They just naturally assume that that it's in Scotland, and you know, that was a massive piece for me in terms of getting all the guests on board, in terms of the process of writing that, in terms of how it was received. I mean, that piece in particular gave me my highest musical chart position. It charted at number 11 in Japan, which is insane because I've never even been to Japan.
You can say you're big in Japan. It's awesome.
I'm big in Japan. The Highland Road is a piece that seems to connect with lots of people. I mean, I was out in... we started off this conversation, James, where obviously we were talking there about how I was just in the US, and people knew the words. Like, people were singing along, and it was quite... People over here are always like, the Highland Road, the Highland Road. I have to tell you, we were out during that trip that we're just on there. We were in, I think it was when we were in Asbury Park in New Jersey, and I told the story about the Highland Road, and Ali was with me, and a guy came over to Ali, and he's like, "Oh, hey Ali, the Highland Road, that's so cool, man. Tell me about the Highland Road." And he was like, "Yeah, well, people ask us all the time about it, right?" So Ali was just kind of done with it, and he was like, he says to the guy, "Well, you know, that's what it's like in Scotland. You know, there's Highland Road 1, Highland Road 2, Highland Road 3, Highland Road 4. And the guy was just like, "Oh man, that's so cool."
But believable for us Americans, though. That's like Interstate 12, Interstate 14. Yeah, totally.
Exactly. We found it so funny that we had this guy believing that every street in Scotland was named Highland Road 1, Highland Road 2.
Of course, that'll be the north-south roads, right? The east-west roads are Lowland Road 1, Lowland Road 2, right?
Exactly. So if that gentleman happens to be listening, apologies for leading you down the garden path. Amazing.
That's great. I really like that. I guess I'd forgotten actually until just now as you were talking. It's actually, is it technically a Cabalistic Cavalry song?
Yes.
I'd put it in my list of tunes that I wanted to talk to you about, though. I'd kind of forgotten about that. So maybe tell me about that. Why do you have two bands? How did that happen?
Yes, so the two band thing is an interesting question. That I had found myself over the years writing a lot of bagpipe led music, but lyrics were not really my thing. I enjoy listening to good lyrics, obviously. Like, words are hugely important, and how you convey them, etc., can have such an influence on people, and it can be an incredibly cathartic kind of process as well. But I didn't find myself very good at it, or so I thought. And then I was in Maxville, Glengarry, for the North American Championships that year, and I was guesting with the guys in the Mariner's Curse, who are now good friends of mine, and obviously had that moment where I was inspired by the Highland Road, and it felt like I was at home, despite the fact that I was so far away from home, and it was my first time in Canada, and it was quite a moving experience in general. And then my friend Chris, who I was staying with at the time, I was like, you know, man, like this is blowing my mind today. Like, I think we ought to write some music and stuff to go alongside this. Now, Chris is an amazing poet. He's like an absolute wordsmith, and he sent me this sort of poem, this sort of piece, and he was like, you know, here's something that like I've written based on what you said. Like, let's like, feel free to do whatever you wish with it. So I chopped and changed some lines and put my own stamp on it and stuff, and then that basically became the Highland Road. I took the piece to Ross, and we had something of a musical disagreement, and he was like, nah, I don't feel like this is a Gleadhraich piece. And I was like, I do, like, but like, okay. And it sort of left me reflecting, and like, I need to do something with this piece. There is some magic in this piece somewhere. Like, this has to be put out there. And it was like, well, okay, let's start another project. And so I released it with the Cavalry. Obviously had a whole range of guests on it, which meant that it was given a bit of a splash in the media, and that resulted in, you know, a great starting point for the Cabalistic Cavalry project because of all that going alongside it. Yeah. Moving forward, I have to say that the Cabalistic Cavalry, that's the only piece in the Cabalistic Cavalry set, I would say, or maybe Fate or Form, that could actually be a Gleadhraich piece. And the Cabalistic Cavalry stuff is mainly, I would say, indie folk rock for the most part. Quite different from anything that Gleadhraich has. I mean, Ross was right when you now listen to any of the other stuff with the Cavalry. But ironically, we do on occasion now play the Highland Road with Gleadhraich live. Yeah. So it's an interesting one, and I guess it was the start of me finding my feet lyrically, that piece, and you know, the opportunities to play guitar stuff and experiment with different musical ideas has been great with the Cavalry. But I think aside from the Highland Road, the two bands are quite distinctively separate. Yeah.
Well, you know, I had kind of imagined that maybe the Cabalistic Cavalry was an opportunity for you to maybe focus more on guitars, ukuleles, that kind of stuff, you know. But I can understand, you know, if Ross says, I don't know if this fits with Gleadhraich, you know, maybe the best path forward would be not to say, oh yes it does, and we're going to do it, you know. So that makes sense.
Yeah. Ironically, Ross actually plays guitar in both projects as well.
Oh, does he? So then you say, all right, Ross, fine. Then come do it with me under a different name. You know, exactly. We're doing it either way.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, in a similar way that it's delightfully surprising that you describe yourself as having been a shy kid who then ended up picking up the pipes and now plays in front of crowds, you know, massive crowds of people all the time, you know. It surprises me that you say that at any point you didn't feel like you were strong as a lyricist, because you certainly seem to be. And in listening to your conversations on the podcast, I feel like you sound to me like a person who's very enthusiastic, who has a very strong appreciation for poetry in general, you know. And so I don't know. I wonder if there's something to this sort of like being a lover of words in a way, right? Maybe because you love them so well, because you grow up reading Robert Burns and stuff like that, right? Maybe that contributes to you maybe thinking to yourself, oh, but I could never myself. You know, I read these masters and what they do is amazing. How could I ever try to do that myself? You know, but then you try it and actually you can do it, you know?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that I obviously was inspired by Robert Burns. That much is clear. It's obviously I've stolen a couple of his lines for my song Fate or Form.
Well, you're required to be inspired by Robert Burns because of where you were born, right? Like, that's a requirement, right? They don't let you out if you don't love Robert Burns.
Yeah, I mean, I'm now making myself sound like I steal things from everyone. I don't, but I certainly stole the line "No man can tether time or tide" from Tam O'Shanter, because I think that's such a powerful quote. That no man can actually ever stop the hands ticking on the clock. No one can ever stop the seas, the tides from moving in each day, and so that inspired that massively. A huge part of my lyrical, poetic interest came from the Libertines, actually, because as much as they are raucous sort of rock music, Peter is such a wordsmith himself, and if you listen to some of his solo material, if you listen to some of the lyrics with the Libertines as well, his lyrics are incredible, like it's really powerful stuff. And obviously he grew up listening to, or like reading works from, like say George Orwell, Hunter S. Thompson, etc., who, as poets were like some sort of, I don't know, heroes, iconic sort of status in terms of what they produced. So I would say that a lot of my lyrical interest and inspiration came from his work, actually. And obviously over the years, like, I've had the opportunity to then go out and guest with him and with the Libertines, and he returned the favour on the Highland Road and stuff. So I think that there's I also think that while the pipe stuff is great, you can convey a message in a different way lyrically as well, and so both are equally. Don't get me wrong, lots of bagpipe pieces can be incredibly moving without lyrics. There is absolutely no doubt about that. And it's so powerful that the instrument has that hold over people. But I think you can convey something different with lyrical content, and I would say that as much as you touched upon the idea that you think that I am quite good lyrically, I think that I'm still on the path to finding my sort of ultimate goal and where I want to go lyrically.
Well, and maybe that's exactly how it should be, right? Maybe if you thought to yourself that you'd arrived, then maybe your lyrics wouldn't be quite so good as they are. So.
And the thing is, maybe you never get there. Maybe you actually never get there. Maybe you're always searching for that sort of end point,
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was, let's see, was it Double Standards, the tune that, was that, help me out, was that the one that you got some Mason's Apron into? Or was that?
No, that's Transformation Blues.
Oh, it was. That's right. I couldn't remember which one.
Yeah, so Transformation Blues moves from the section that is called Transformation that I wrote, and then when it breaks down, it heads into the Mason's Apron.
Yeah, I love what you did with the Mason's Apron there. That was excellent.
Thanks, man.
But maybe tell me a little bit about Double Standards, because as I was listening to Double Standards kind of on repeat while I was on a flight coming back from Arizona, I was thinking to myself, like, how much competition piping did this guy do? Maybe back up a little bit in your story and tell me about, was it your mother's uncle who taught you to play, or did that just get you started and you went and found somebody else to teach you?
Nah, for the most part it was Jack. I went to lessons with him for years. I I was quite heavily involved in the Arbroath pipe band because I'd had Morag Mackenzie, Ryan Kennedy also sort of giving me some tuition along the way. Harry Ellis was also influential in that, and I would actually say that his son Lindsay and Terry Reid as well, through the Tayside Police pipe band stuff, they all had an influence, of course, but I think you sort of reach a point where you then have to find your own sort of inspirations and influences as well. That's not to say that some of the best pipers still go to the lessons from their superiors and stuff, but I mean, it came from the lessons and stuff came from Jack initially, and that was pretty much the case throughout.
And then did you compete for a chunk of years and then kind of leave competition to kind of move into the rock space, or are the two running together in tandem in your life?
Well, competition piping I did quite a bit of when I was a child, but again you have to remember I was painfully shy, and I actually found it really challenging to go and stand solo in front of a judge and be judged, because I don't know, I found it really tough, actually, to the point that my mum often could not enter the room or enter the competition space or enter the field like anywhere near me, because she got so nervous for me because I was so painfully and ultimately, because of that shyness, because of that nervousness that I experienced as well, I didn't achieve like I probably could have or should have in solo competitive piping. I then went into pipe bands as well. I've already touched upon the fact that the Arbroath pipe band were a massive part of my life. I sort of grew up there. They also helped me along the way. Jack had taken me along there. I'd met lots of people there that became friends and played with them for a long time, right up to the point of becoming pipe sergeant with them. We had some success in the grade 4 and 3 sort of categories. I moved on to the Tayside Police pipe band in grade 1, and then they sadly folded because of lots of different things, but mainly the police restructuring in Scotland, which was a real shame because the Tayside Police were a great band for our local area. And then from there I ended up back at Arbroath. But I would say that when I ended up back at Arbroath, the challenge for me was the fact that Gleadhraich stuff was rising. We were getting a lot more bookings, we were getting a lot more interest, and ultimately pipe band season clashes completely and entirely with festival season for other bands, and thus I had to make a conscious decision to stop playing in pipe bands in order to basically push and promote what we do as a band, because my feeling was that we should take on every opportunity to promote our music for as long and as far flung as we can, because ultimately pipe bands will always be there. And I don't doubt that at some point in my future I will return to pipe bands and the pipe band scene. But for now, obviously, the main focus is, those festivals and stuff through the summer, which are obviously amazing. Festivals are a very, very special thing to be a part of and to perform at. And I am wholly, I think, justified in my decision.
Yes, you are.
To do that.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would second guess you at this point for sure. And listen, Craig, if for whatever reason you decide you want a nice, quiet, high desert retirement in Utah a few decades from now, I know a few pipe bands that would be more than happy to welcome you in.
Nice. Well, 2056 we said, right?
That's where we end the road trip here in Utah. That's what we do.
Brilliant, man. Brilliant.
So do you feel like right now, do you still feel like in your mind you're calling back on those competition medleys and stuff for any of the inspiration when you're sitting down to write a new piece, or do you feel like you're very much in a different headspace right now when you're making music?
I would say that initially there was a lot of influence from pipe bands and stuff. You touched upon the Mason's Apron, which obviously forms a significant part in many pipe bands, medleys and stuff, or at least in concept pieces. I would say that previously, yes, there was a lot of pipe band medley inspiration, etc. In my stuff. But actually now, like I've been removed from pipe bands for long enough that I feel like I'm doing something different and in a different headspace from that. So yeah.
Do you ever feel like do you like? I don't know how I want to say this in the right way. Do you ever feel like you encounter crowds or listeners who maybe reference Gleadhraich? Sorry, I keep trying to pronounce the name of the band right. Gleadhraich, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you ever feel like you encounter people who are sort of like referencing your work in relationship to the Red Hot Chili Peppers?
Yes, and I think it would be unnatural if that was not the case. They opened up that sort of platform for lots of bands like us, and while we make a marked point of being ourselves and being unique and trying to be different from them, it has to be said that without them there might not be bands like ourselves, because they obviously there was Gordon Duncan and whatnot, and then them who just sort of blasted that sort of closed-minded ceiling that people had about the bagpipes completely and utterly into the water, which like opened up, as I say, like a whole new opportunity for bands like ours. So while I would not go on record and say, oh, we are here like copying the Red Hot Chili Peppers or being an extension of them, we try to do our own thing, but without them I think that it would have been very hard for bands like ours to exist, if that makes any kind of sense.
Yes, that does make sense, and that's exactly why I wanted to be cautious, because it's obvious to anyone listening that you are your own thing, right? But I can imagine that you might have that experience of like going to play a show and being like, oh my gosh, I love the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and be like, well, but they're not here tonight. You know what I mean? And I'd imagine that. But yeah, that's a sensible relationship. If they're a trailblazer, in a way,
that's
then
a good word.
You've carved out your own space, of course. But
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Now, and of course, I can't imagine them doing, for example, a tune like Skirling Ska, which is one that I really like quite a lot. Was that one on your first album, or is that on Rewritten?
No, that Skirling Ska was not on any of those. Skirling Ska was a one-off single that was written it was for the Commonwealth Games when they came to Glasgow in, what was that, 2014? I think 2014. Yeah, it was written for the Commonwealth Games because we were involved in the handing over of the Commonwealth baton, and so we decided to write something that reflected that, and we went for it because we felt that a piece like Skirling Ska, with the ska influences, pulled in some of the different influences from sort of around the Commonwealth, if you like.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Love that tune. So
thanks, man.
Now that's one event you've played. You guys have played some crazy events. Do you feel like if a little bit early on, like you played for like the Dalai Lama, or like the Olympic torch, that kind of stuff. This is stuff that you've done, right? Do you feel like those kinds of things kind of set a trajectory for you, where like right now, like shoot, like when you played for the Queen, did you think to yourself, well, I've already played for Arnold Schwarzenegger, so this is no big deal, like to what degree? You're a shy kid, right? So the shy kid, Craig, how are you doing what you're doing now? Have these experiences kind of stacked in a way to where at this point would anything get you nervous?
I think 2012 was a funny old year because within, I think it was about 10 days of each other, I had played for the Dalai Lama visiting Dundee, and then we were on stage there in the town welcoming in the Olympic torch, which is just, for those two things to have happened in such a short space of time for some young kids, I mean, that was 10 years ago.
Must have been surreal.
So I would have been 19, right? And so for a group of young kids, like to have had that those two opportunities within such a short space of time was quite mind blowing, actually. Yeah. And Ali and I recently running from the Dundee show that we touched upon, the homecoming one, through to September, we've been like talking about how we'll be riding a wave of like excitement during that period from March to September. But actually we've probably been riding that wave since 2012.
You've been riding that wave for a decade now.
Yeah, those experiences are just unprecedented. Just like so incredibly. We're just so incredibly fortunate and lucky and grateful to have had those opportunities and experiences. To go back to your second point, I don't think it would be natural to just sort of take those kind of standard, those kind of levels of events and gigs and just be like, oh yeah, just another one, just sort of play it off. When those sort of events, when those sort of scale of events or experiences or whatnot sort of come our way, whether it's a phone call, whether it's an email, whatever it is, there is still absolutely that buzz of, oh wow, like this is going to be, oh yeah, absolutely. And we have never lost sight of how lucky we are to have those kind of standard of performances,
Now, I'm sure that I don't think the World Peace Tartan was a thing yet in 2012, but it did ding off in my mind that I know I've seen you in a World Peace Tartan kilt, and I've seen the Dalai Lama wearing a World Peace Tartan scarf, but that wasn't a thing in 2012, right? That hadn't started yet.
Wrong, actually.
Really?
So the World Peace Tartan itself was launched during the Dalai Lama's visit to Scotland in 2012. Yeah.
That makes sense, but I thought, this is just me having my own awareness, right? I wasn't aware of it that long ago, and so assuming that, of course, my awareness reflects the world, that makes a lot of sense, though. Well, there you go.
The World Peace Tartan was designed by Victor Spence, and Victor was responsible for the organisation and planning of the Dalai Lama's visit to Scotland.
So very much involved,
huh? Yeah, so he naturally, it was the perfect sort of product placement at that time, to be honest. The opportunity was taken to have the Dalai Lama wear the World Peace Tartan during that visit to Scotland, and thus that was the launch of that tartan at that point.
Yeah. Well, there you go. It's a lovely tartan. I do like it a lot. And a lovely vision behind it, too, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a beautiful tartan, and I'm obviously privileged to be an ambassador for that as well.
Yeah, what does that entail for you? Do you just try to wear it now and again and talk about it, or do they have you do events, or what does that mean to be an ambassador for the World Peace Tartan?
Well, I suppose it's first of all increasing awareness of its existence, increasing awareness of its message, which obviously is wholly associated with world peace. And each of the colours in the tartan have different significance and relevance to it, which is amazing. I obviously have opportunities to play at lots of different events around the world, and those particularly that have peace connotations, I tend to wear the World Peace Tartan for. I have to say that I am one thing that's been challenging of late is increasing my ambassadorial roles, which means that people are always like, oh, you're going to wear my kilt today, you're going to wear this here, you're going to wear that there, and it's but it's just a privilege to obviously be representing all of them, and the world peace is such an important message to get out there 100%. Yeah. Especially at a time when you've got a terrible situation going on in Ukraine, and you can't forget some of the other things that are going on in Palestine and whatnot as well. Yeah,
absolutely. Your path, Craig, seems to me to have been just wonderfully random. The prison inmate, pen pals, a chance meeting in a urinal. All these things leading to shows and connections and stuff. Do you feel like right now, the 10-year mark feels like a great spot for it, and that, you've been doing it. Right now, when you look back, over this trajectory, in spite of having lived all of this, does it ever feel disorienting to you? How is this happening?
Yes. I've had it said to me lots of times over the years that I have the gift of the gab, and having not spoken for most of my childhood, I think I'm making up for it now.
You're making up for it.
I love connecting with people. I love talking with people. I love, and that certainly helps me because people enjoy a good conversation and like an opportunity to network. Do I find it disorienting? Yes, 100%. I mean, I've touched upon already the fact that the pandemic has meant that everyone had that opportunity to stop and go, okay, wow, this has happened, this is nuts, this is mind-blowing. But actually, heaven forbid this happen, and we don't want it to happen 100%, but if there were to be another pandemic now and everything's shut back down again, I think that it'd be the same sort of feeling based upon the last 9 months, because
you haven't wasted
everything
time,
everything that's happened for me and us in the last 8 to 9 months has been equally mind-blowing. You know, there was a point that, naturally, I'm sure lots of musicians thought this, that there was a point during all of it that you were sat in the house thinking, will the world ever be as it was again? Like, will we ever get back to playing events on this scale? Will we ever get back to doing those things, or is that done? Is that chapter finished and we move on? But obviously, I've been incredibly fortunate that that's not happened, and that everything's just blown up and been just as crazy and mental ever since. But it's great, and I love it, and we love it, and it's it is incredibly disorienting though.
Yeah. Well, let me just really strongly recommend anybody listening, if you haven't already checked out Craig's podcast, it's just chock full of awesome stories, and the relationship that you have with Ali and with your guests, comes through. I feel like I, in contrast to yourself, am an enthusiastic podcast connoisseur and have been for years. And for me, what I love about the sort of like the magic of entering into a conversation is that when there's chemistry between, when the two hosts are friends and they have a history, they could be talking about anything, and I would love listening, just because there's something magic about that, and it's achieved in this show. So there will be a link in the show notes below here if you want to go check that show out. It's a good one.
Thank you. I mean, the thing with the podcast is that when our friends listened to it during the pandemic, they said it felt like they were just sat in the pub with Ali and I, and that we were just sort of bouncing off of each other as naturally as we would do. Like most of that, like obviously we made notes on what we wanted to ask our guests and where we wanted the show to go, but it was by no means scripted. So much of that was just like off the cuff, like chatting as we went and just sort of sharing memories and stories. And what I am proud of though with the podcast is how we tackled a whole range of societal issues, from mental health to addiction to body confidence, and lots of different powerful societal messages. Those
were so surprising to me, but so well handled.
Thanks, man. I mean, it kind of, again, when we reflect on that journey with the podcast, to have managed to cover so many societal issues and for the podcast to have been so widely listened to. I mean, at this point, I think on the day of recording here, we have charted in the top 200 podcasts in 19 different countries today, which is just staggering, to be honest with you.
What was it? Was it Afghanistan? Did it pop it up?
Yes, we hit number one in Afghanistan on the week of the Taliban resurgence. Don't ask me how that happened. I don't know, but it's just another random happenstance that has occurred in our lives. Man.
Well, that's I couldn't be happier for you. It's just awesome. I wouldn't have expected someone who's a really great musician isn't always going to be also a great conversationalist,
Yeah, sure.
But your podcast could exist all by itself, and it's a great thing all by itself, And so your music is a great thing, the podcast is a great thing, and I feel like listeners listening to the two probably are getting just a wonderful experience getting it all together,
Yeah, I hope so, because I mean, ultimately, that's another thing about the podcast, that we wanted to sort of share some of those behind the scenes sort of, and give people a backstage angle of some of the mad things that have happened, and I hope that we've managed to capture that.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's been a delightful part. Yeah, hearing the story of Highland Road, for example, especially there where I already had a conception in my head of what this song, where it came from and what it was about, and so to have that turned upside down and find out this other story it's a lot of fun.
And I think it's important that people know that, for example, because at the time when it was released, everyone was like, "Well, this is just an independence anthem for Scotland."
Obviously,
and I'm like, hold on a minute. No, it's not. There is no political connotation to the piece at all.
Yeah.
It's a travel story, you know.
Yeah. Well, Craig, I've kept you for an hour, and I don't want to squander my time with a big star guest, but I also don't want to take up your whole weekend. Are there any tracks from your albums or singles that you would like to hit upon a bit before we draw to hopefully a graceful close?
Oh man, I mean, I could tell stories about any of them, to be honest with you.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, if there's any, are there any others that you want to mention that you think, oh, well, tell me about this one?
I did feel like Summer Rain would be a lovely closer, if that feels like a good closer to you.
Yeah, I mean, Summer Rain. It's personally, actually, ironically, one of my least favourite pieces in a it's one of my least favourites in a Gleadhraich set. Yeah, it's one of Graham and Mark's favourite. It's the first, like, when we sit down to write a set list, the two of them are like, Summer Rain, and I'm like, oh, what, again? Because it feels now, upon reflection, like it's quite throwaway. So, for example, I think it captures some of the punk sort of attitude of like the previous bands and influences that I've mentioned.
Yeah.
I think that arrangement-wise, we could have done so much more with it, and that it feels quite throwaway. Which is probably why I don't like it as much. There's not a major story behind it. I guess it was, inspired by that, that sunniness that sometimes we experience in Scotland, believe it or not, coupled with
dappled sun, right?
Yeah, that sort of idea of like sunshine and the rain coming down and like, I don't know, it sounds really cliched. And
well, hey, let's pick a different one then.
Well, what I will say is there was a festival in Germany that we played, and we opened with Summer Rain, and it was nice and sunny when we walked out. And the second that we kicked into Summer Rain, it started raining. It was like, what?
Like they're trying to shut you down.
Yeah, it was mad. It was crazy. Yeah, maybe there's another one that's got.
Well, I do really like Nowhere Man. That's another favorite of mine. I like that one quite a lot.
Well, that's a Ross story actually. It was one of his, and I think he said something about it's kind of like there was a guy that he kept seeing when he was out running, and I can't remember the actual background behind it. To be honest.
No sweat. I got a whole list here, so no.
Try again.
Let me try my luck again here. What about maybe would it be overly sentimental to ask you to tell me about Granny Gordon's tune? Because I feel like that anybody, if it's got Granny in the title, it must be special somehow. Yeah,
well, that's a good one to ask me about. I bet you're relieved.
There we go. Finally hit on one. There we go.
My great gran was incredible. She.
Oh, so it's your granny. It's your granny then.
My great gran, yeah. My great gran, yeah. She. I sometimes credit her actually as being the musical the person that sort of drummed the music into me, because she'd sit me on her knee, and this is some of my earliest memories of my childhood. She'd sit me on her knee, and she'd what she called diddle me, and that means just like sort of bouncing me on her knee and singing like Scottish little Scottish sort of almost like bothy ballads. So that sounds like nonsense, but she did that to me from a very, very young age, and actually I've been quite intrigued by some of the research behind how that can influence someone musically, and there is absolutely a correlation between, being exposed to music like that from a young age to actually, experiencing a talent for music.
Is this your great grand on your mother's side or your father's side?
Mum's side, and her husband, my great granddad, was a great fiddle player as well. So I think that there was an interest in Scottish music from there, certainly, and I do think that she was a massive influence in terms of that. She loved the pipes. She was. It's a hard tale to tell, actually. In a few years ago, this must have been 5 years ago, I wrote that piece purely as a bagpipe piece for her 95th birthday, when we initially went to, we planned that big 10th anniversary show in Dundee. That was a major piece in our show because we wanted to, recognise her and all that sort of thing. And then she very, very sadly passed with COVID. Right at the start of the pandemic. She was in a care home by that point, and it pretty much wiped out the whole home, I think. She would have been 100 last month, and I'm pretty sure she might well have made it to 100 were it not for the pandemic, and I have now retired the piece from playing because we actually played it last. We played it in March at the Dundee show. We paid tribute to her, but it was the most emotional wreck of a thing that I've ever been on stage. Like I could feel the tears trickling down my cheeks as I was playing it. I turned round and could see Paul like almost using his drumsticks to dry his eyes. It was like there was sort of not a dry eye in the place. And at that point I sort of said, look, we're retiring this. We can't do this again. It was like she was an incredible lady, and one that we all very, very sadly miss. But actually I'm really proud of the piece because I think it captures her quite well, actually, in terms of it's a very moving piece of music that I feel that it is, and I'm particularly proud of that one. I do remember there's the little twinkly guitar parts and the big sprawling sort of spacey kind of solo that comes in towards the end, and we'd actually finished in the studio, rewritten, and I turned and said to Ross, look, do you know what, that needs a big sprawling sort of spacey solo. Get your slider, get your guitar, let's try it. And he smashed it right away, and it was like, wow, that is exactly what that piece was needing.